So thank you for joining us today at this Pharmacy Ethics Speakers Series. Uh, this is a program collaboratively produced by the CU Center for Bioethics and Humanities and the Skaggs School of Pharmacy and Pharmaceutical Sciences. I'm Mike DiStefano. I'm an assistant professor at the Skaggs School of Pharmacy and Pharmaceutical Sciences, and I'll be the moderator for today's event. And this speaker series this year is focused on exploring ethical challenges and opportunities in different pharmacy settings. And we want this to be especially relevant for practicing pharmacists, trainees, current students, and prospective students. So if you enjoy today's event, please do join the Center for Bioethics mailing list or check the campus event listings to get details on some upcoming programs in the spring. And now I'd like to introduce today's guest, Dr. Kai Davis. We're very happy he's agreed to join us today. Dr. Davis is the pharmacy manager and a co-owner of Harris Pharmacy in Rocky Ford, Colorado, a town that has a population of 3,800 people. Dr. Davis, who's the son of a pharmacist, used to spend his after-school hours helping out in the back room of a small town pharmacy. And after graduating from pharmacy school at CU Anschutz, he returned to Southeast Colorado and took over operations at Harris Pharmacy. And after a few years, he entered into a type of junior partnership to start purchasing into the company. And we'll talk a little bit more about that structure later on. And 18 years later, he's still in Rocky Ford with his wife and 2 kids, advocating for independent pharmacy and rural healthcare. So with that, we'll get started. So Kai, maybe you could just start by telling us a little bit about, oh yes, of course, we have a couple pictures just to set the scene here. So this is Kai's pharmacy, Harris Pharmacy here. Maybe Kai, you want to explain briefly why the watermelon pictures are included?
Yeah, so Rocky Ford is our claim to fame. We're the sweet melon capital of the world. Back 100 years ago, train stopped one time and a man named George Swink sliced up his harvest of watermelon for the people stopping through on the train. Became such a big hit that it launched the Ark Valley Fair, where we still give away that picture there with all the watermelon. Is in that's one of the first watermelon days. Every year they still give away a watermelon to everybody who comes to the fair. Just show up and they hand you a watermelon. So that's been going on a long time. We produce some of the best watermelon in the world and produce seeds for new varieties of watermelon grown all over the planet. There on the right is the Melon Man. That's the high school mascot. We are the Rocky Ford Meloneers, and that's our mascot, which always gets national attention for best mascots. It's nice to have an original one. It's not just another eagle or bulldog or something.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Yeah, and I imagine, the football games are an important part of life in the community there.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. So yeah, could you start by telling us a little bit about your journey to becoming a pharmacist and what led you to practice in Rocky Ford?
So I'd always, I grew up in the pharmacy in Eads, Colorado, which honestly makes Rocky Ford look like a metropolis. Eads has a population of 600 people, probably the smallest town, certainly the smallest town in the state with a pharmacy, and possibly the smallest town in the country with a pharmacy. It is a very remote area, and I grew up and was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And I could look at my dad and say, he seemed to really enjoy his work. He enjoyed the people he interacted with every day. He did not seem like he had to drag himself there against his will. And also, honestly, from watching as a high schooler, it didn't look that hard. It looked like something I could do. School was harder than I anticipated, but it was definitely something that I could do. And I chose that path. And then when the time came for me to graduate, my graduation day was actually the same day as the funeral of one of my dad's partners in his business, who had ran the pharmacy here in Rocky Ford for, about 20 some years. And that meant there was an opening. He unfortunately passed away from cancer, and I moved right in to that role because it was there, and I've not looked back and been here ever since. It has felt like moving into a bigger town because we've got a movie theater and we've got multiple restaurants and those kind of things that coming from a small town weren't accessible. But also having lived in Denver, it's definitely not that either. It's somewhere in the middle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so could you describe the community a bit more that your
Yeah,
pharmacy
so
serves?
we're basically a one stoplight town on Main Street, and you know, a handful of small businesses, 3,800 people. It is I would say, slightly older population, but maybe not as much as some of the other towns in the area. The small towns do kind of tend to attract retirees to move in. It's a slower pace of life that they often enjoy. They're able to buy a house for relatively small amount of money. Housing is quite a bit cheaper here, so they're able to sell their home in the city and then live off of those proceeds from the spread of buying a home here. It's a heavily Hispanic area. Probably about 2/3 of the population is Hispanic, and a heavy agricultural area. That is the main industry by far is farming and ranching.
And does the pharmacy serve primarily Rocky Ford, or does it bring in patients from nearby
So
towns?
yeah, Rocky Ford is a big enough town, you know, 3,800 people. We're the only pharmacy in town. Certainly a big enough town to support a pharmacy on its own, but you do have to go, if you're heading west, you've got to go an hour before you hit another pharmacy in Pueblo. And if you head east, it's only about 10 miles to get to La Habana, where there's a Walmart and another independent pharmacy there. So we do serve a considerable area, especially to the west. There are towns like Fowler and Manzanola that we are the closest pharmacy to and have a lot of patients there. My group of pharmacies has one there in Eads that I'd mentioned earlier, and it's covering an area of, you know, you can draw a 40-mile circle around it and not hit a pharmacy in any direction. So it's covering a very large area.
And in terms of the payer mix, do you have a good spread across, you know, commercial, Medicare, Medicaid, or is it lean toward one?
So we're heavy Medicaid. About 30% of all my claims are Medicaid, and then over 40% are Medicare. You include dual eligible, certainly over half of my patients are Medicaid eligible. Then probably about 20% of a mix of private payers. It's a relatively small portion of mine is commercial private insurance, and then cash or uninsured kind of rounds out the rest of that.
Okay, yeah, that's, I think, important context for some of the issues we'll be getting into. Also, you've already mentioned this a little bit, but I'm interested in understanding a little about the history of the pharmacy. So you mentioned you took over from a pharmacist who I assume had been there a long time and then unfortunately passed. Could you just describe a bit of the genesis of the pharmacy, how maybe its services or role has evolved over time, if it has, or?
Yeah, so Harris Pharmacy was opened as Holland Drug in 1943, and then purchased by John Harris, who changed the name in the 60s, and we've left it there. My predecessor came in 82, and I took over in 2007, running it. But our group, I came down here in 2007 and started working, and entered shortly after that into kind of a junior partnership where I started purchasing into our company, which at the time had 5 pharmacies. And I've mentioned my dad was a part of that. That leads a lot of people to believe it's a family business. It wasn't. He had partners who were not relatives at all, and I kind of purchased in just like one of the non-relatives would. And I've now got 4 other partners who are roughly my stage in life, and we are all equal partners in it, that own these 6 pharmacies now. So it's definitely an unusual structure, but it has worked well for us to get here.
Yeah, so I think we'll talk a bit about that later on. But so this pharmacy has been like continually operating for decades.
Yeah, since 1943, we've been operating. I think we moved buildings once. There's some interesting stuff when you're in a building that's been this long. I've got the original owner's history textbook that had been left here from the early 1918 or something. That, you know, it's interesting reading a history textbook that predates World War I and talks about the Civil War as recent history. But yeah, there's some interesting things when you're in a building that's had a pharmacy around that long. Old prescriptions are certainly interesting to look through too.
Great. Cool. Well, all right. With all that context, I think we can move into some of the more substantive, questions here. And so, as I've said, this series, we're really trying to focus on some of the challenges, but also opportunities presented by different pharmacy practice settings. And so I think I'll start with a couple questions relating to challenges so that we can end with opportunities, the more optimistic side of things. Although I think probably in discussing these challenges, some potential solutions and opportunities will arise. But so we'll just start with, pharmacy closures. These are, of course, a big topic these days. A lot of research has been done on the issue of pharmacy closures. There's a recent analysis that came out just this year that found significant churn in the community pharmacy market. So they measure that as, close to 6% annual turnover of pharmacies from 2010 to 2023. So just a lot of closures, a lot of openings, right? This can be disruptive in many ways. And the research also shows that independent pharmacies like yours are at a greater risk of closure than chain pharmacies. So just to start, how have pharmacy closures impacted your community, your broad region of the state?
That's a very timely question because we are 32 days removed from Safeway closing 8 pharmacies or 8 stores that included pharmacies across the region, 6 of them in Colorado, and 2 of them are in my footprint. One of them's in the town right next door. That's led to, a whole lot of displaced patients. They did some 350 prescriptions a day that now have to go somewhere else, and it's sent some of them my way, certainly. I think the 3rd closest pharmacy to them, so I'm not getting the bulk of it, but I'm getting a considerable increase in business. So that is definitely happening. That's more on the corporate side, and I'm sure Safeway has their reasons for that. But I will say, in a small town, it feels somewhat abandoned to have that's our only true grocery store. There's also a Walmart, but it's not the same business model. To have that go is a big blow to the community. It's one of the times where I really feel the difference in living in a small town versus a city is, my ability to purchase things that you definitely take for granted. Now I've got to plan it to either order it online in advance or plan it for when I'm making a trip up to the next city, because they're just no longer available for sale here. So that's a difficulty of being in a small town. As far as the pharmacy component, the industry, the business seems to keep getting tougher. Reimbursement continues to drop. Our cost of goods is only going up with the increase in high cost drugs. So the inventory that we have to carry gets more expensive every year at an alarming rate. And couple that with decreasing reimbursement, and you see pharmacies go under. I think most of the independent pharmacies that go under tend to fall into 2 categories. They're either new startups that maybe didn't realize what they expected in their business plan. They didn't capture the business they did. They weren't able to achieve the metrics that they had planned. Or the other one that is honestly sadder to me is the situation where a pharmacist decides to retire or dies, and that leaves a void, and there aren't a whole lot of people looking to go buy pharmacies. There aren't. that entrepreneurial spirit in pharmacists is dwindling, I think.
Yeah, I want to come back to that point in a moment. But in terms of the, corporate closures, I imagine, right, in some instances that could be a boon, right, for some independent pharmacies, and in others it might actually overburden the independent pharmacies that maybe don't have the staff to take on that new set of patients. I mean, what has been the general experience, you think, in your region following these closures?
I mean, it is both of those things at once. I've talked to, for us, it's been an increase of 10% in our volume of scripts, which is a significant amount to take on overnight, but not so overwhelming that I'm scrambling to hire staff. But some other pharmacies in the area are seeing increases of 50-70% in their prescription volume overnight, and that is real hard to do when you aren't properly prepared for it. And they only gave about 3 weeks notice, so nobody was properly prepared for it. That has been very difficult. I've talked to those pharmacists, and they are putting in 14-hour days, 7 days a week to try and stay ahead of it, and still not delivering the service that they expect of themselves. So that's a very difficult component to take that on, and I believe that will kind of level out as time goes on, but it's a very difficult portion of it.
Mm. And so what accounts for that leveling it out? Is it that patients sort of find other pharmacies, right, that better fit their needs, or is it that these pharmacies are able over time to, hire the staff needed to meet the demand?
So if you're increasing by 50 or 70%, I think you're obviously working to hire some additional people right away. Particularly in rural areas, we don't have a deep pool of licensed certified techs to pull from. Almost every time I hire a tech, I'm hiring a person on a provisional tech license and training them, and I've got 18 months to get them ready to pass that test. So to just hire somebody, they are more work than they are help, because you're having to show them everything along the way. So that part takes a little while to level out. And then the other part, when you're taking on a new pharmacy, there's the logistics of every patient is new. You've got to import all these new allergies, new insurance. Every step takes 4 times as long. The next month when you fill it, you're able to do that 4 times faster. So that part will get easier as we go forward.
And yeah, so it sounds like perhaps innovations in the future in sort of interoperability of patient record systems could help to improve that initial shock, right?
We have seen exactly that. One of the pharmacies, the Safeway in Lamar that closed, went to our sister store, and we were able to work with our technology provider to get those to import directly into our system. So it's all right there. We've been able to handle that pretty well. The one in La Junta that transferred, they've had to do all of that by hand. Every time a prescription comes, they have to pull it up on the old system, manually and enter it into their new system. And I mean, that is a night and day difference, as you can imagine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in a couple ways now, I think you've mentioned, or at least alluded to, difficulty of, identifying necessary talent, right? So in this one case, we have closures that increase demand. You don't have a deep pool of, licensed techs. You have to identify people who you can train up, right? And that places a burden on you. And then we also have, you mentioned this almost maybe under-remarked upon cause of closures in rural areas, which are, retirements or deaths, right? And there you need to replace the person with a pharmacist, not simply a tech. And so I'm wondering if we could, spend a little time thinking through, maybe what strategies you or others in your community have used to replace those positions, and also, what thoughts you might have regarding what we could do, right, in schools of pharmacy to better incentivize, right, people to take those roles, be they tech or pharmacist roles.
Yeah, no, it's There's a lot there.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there was a lot. We can break it down, but I'll let you
yeah.
start.
So one of the stories I know I've shared with you before, in, gosh, I don't even remember what year it was, 2016, 2018, somewhere in there. The pharmacist in a nearby town, Shinewells, passed away suddenly, and he was as close to a one-man operation as you get. He worked without a tech, did a relatively small, not relatively, did a small volume of prescriptions, but it was a situation where he took over the pharmacy from his dad. Building was owned free and clear outright, operated on an old pharmacy software that he paid very little money for. His overhead was low, so it did not take much to, he owned his home. His take home at the end of the day was enough to pay his bills, and I think he was happy. I think if a new grad came out wanting to pay off student loans and took over that pharmacy, it would go under pretty quick, because I don't think it would support all those other things. So he passed away suddenly, did not work with a technician, used an antiquated pharmacy software system, and we get a call from the sheriff's office saying, hey, we need to get into the pharmacy to get some personal effects for family, but we can't go in there without a pharmacist present. Can you guys come meet us? So I drove over there on the Saturday and met the sheriff, and showed him my pharmacy license. First time I ever had to show anybody my pharmacist license that wasn't a pharmacy inspector. And he let us in the building with the keys they had, and I supervised the drugs, and they gathered the personal effects. And a couple weeks later, or not even a couple weeks, I think the next weekend, I was going back out to inventory their controlled substances so they could do a proper closing. Worked with the board to make that work. Long story short, we wound up taking over that business, not as a pharmacy, but we have shifted into essentially a drop-off location. We fill all the prescriptions out of our nearest pharmacy, which is 40 miles away. This town is still 40 miles from the nearest pharmacy, and we deliver to them every day. We take a delivery load over, and then people can come in. It still has out front items. If they want to buy some Tylenol and some deodorant, we sell Tylenol and deodorant just like any other pharmacy, but we do not have a pharmacist or drugs on stock. We do deliver prescriptions and then sell them almost like an Amazon Dropbox kind of concept. In another small town, we do run very much like an Amazon Dropbox. There's a kiosk that we scan the prescriptions in, sends a text to the patient. Patient comes in, scans the QR code on their text, pops open the door, they pick up their prescriptions. So that's another way that we've tried to bring healthcare to a town that doesn't have pharmacy. Both of those, we have the ability to do real-time video counseling, that kind of thing. And it's not as good as in person, but we like to think it's the next best thing.
Yeah, so this is very interesting, and I'm wondering, what challenges you've faced in getting that type of service up and running and successful. Has it been, a pretty straightforward solution to this problem of losing a pharmacist in that town, or were there quite a number of hurdles to overcome in getting this working?
There were definitely a lot of hurdles, but I will say the people have been so overwhelmingly grateful. In that process of those hurdles, they had a couple months anyway where we're trying to figure out all this out, what can we do, what works, what makes sense, financially. And during that time, they had no pharmacy, and that means they're driving 40 miles each way to the nearest pharmacy. And when we're able to come in and deliver stuff to their town again, just overwhelming support and people grateful. It's a key part of any town to have access to healthcare, and pharmacy is a critical part of access to healthcare. Having a pharmacist there is important too, but there's some situations where there's only so much that we can do. The hurdles, the big ones, no providers are paying us for those deliveries. It is a big expense to pay somebody to drive over there. That's an hour and a half on the road, plus all the miles on the car, all of those things. Nobody's paying for it, so that's just coming out of the margin done otherwise. but it is a very captive audience and a very loyal patient base that I think is what kind of makes it work.
Mhm. Yeah, so I'm wondering as well, like whether this type of model is, you know, functioning elsewhere, or if this, are there lessons that could be applied from your experience to expand this approach in other rural areas? It sounds like a main hurdle is, yeah, you're not getting paid for doing the delivery. Can
I
you
know
think there's
some,
some reasons why this maybe isn't as widely adopted as it could otherwise be? Or
I know of some other regions where I know in the mountains there's a town where pharmacy delivers, and they just kind of meet at a central point in town, and their delivery driver
Mhm.
parks there for a half hour, and people come meet him at the car and pick up their stuff.
Okay. Yeah.
So kind of a version of that model with certainly lower overhead, and but that same thing of trying to find a way to deliver
Mhm.
healthcare where it otherwise isn't, in a more timely manner than traditional mail order, which is very very slow
Yeah.
and slow to respond. I think the biggest hurdle is definitely the delivery costs, the overhead that goes into that. It's also logistically quite an undertaking to work on, to make sure that you're not leaving those things out, because if I miss something on my counter here that somebody's going to come in for, and they show up and ask if it's ready, I can say, oh no, it's not, but give me 3 minutes and I'll have that finished up. If I miss somebody on that delivery, it means it's not going until tomorrow, and that can be a real problem. Or we have to send a special route, which is obviously a very expensive mistake to make. So
Mhm.
definitely
Yeah.
have to build out systems to manage that.
Yeah. Well, and I think this illustrates really well that, the different causes of pharmacy closures may require very different solutions. And, certainly declining reimbursement is a big cause, but addressing that, right, will require very different solutions than these sorts of closures that are initiated by like deaths or retirement and difficulty of replacing those pharmacists. Um,
Before we move on, I want to touch
yeah,
one thing that,
sure.
since we're talking about ethics and all this, has always really stuck with me. I mentioned that nobody's paying for that delivery charge. I reached out to one of the big PBMs and said, hey, we're covering an area for you that you guys are not able to cover. You're not about to go, CVS Caremark, you're not about to go put a CVS in Cheyenne Wells, Colorado. We're providing a service to your covered lives, your patients, to offer this delivery service, and we'd like you to consider this as above and beyond. And their response was very adversarial. They said, you have to get special permission to use a courier to deliver anything. They view that as their mail order turf that we were stepping on. We were
Mhm.
not helping them out. We were stepping on their toes. One of the things we've been able to do since then, since that email was in House Bill 1222 that passed last year, we made it so that you don't have to get permission to do those delivery situations. So that
Yeah.
part has always really stuck in my craw as being just greed for the sake of greed, to try and capture this group of people to provide an inferior service. And if there's one thing that really gets me going, it's thinking that people in rural settings deliver lower quality healthcare. We're doing essential parts of the economy for the country. Agriculture can't happen in big cities. That's just not the way it works. You need the land, and as long as people need food, we need to take care of the people who provide the food.
Mhm. Yeah, and well, I think that is a great example of the power of the legislative change, right?
Mhm.
I mean, a need was identified, and I believe that bill was introduced in February and signed into law in May, right? So there was a lot of support for that bill, and it had other elements to it, which I'm sure we can discuss. Um, Well, let's talk a bit more about your ownership group, because I think it's a special, or a unique situation that right. So you are part of an ownership group that includes several pharmacies in the area. You already described it a little bit, but could you give a little more, description of how that group came to be, how it operates, the structure of that group, and how you think it maybe has contributed to your ongoing success, like in this climate of closures?
Sure. Yeah, we had 5 pharmacies, all roughly 20 to 40 miles from each other. There was an opportunity in 2018. We added a 6th one. Plus, we have I don't even have a word for it, the storefront that acts as a pharmacy pickup, to be our 7th location we have. We had 2 senior partners who were retiring, and 5 essentially staff pharmacists, 4 plus myself, who were interested in purchasing in. So we did a junior partnership type stake where they put up, did not have to, but this is the way that they chose to help fund it. They put up half the profits from the corporation every year, went into a fund that purchased shares for us. So it was not money that we put forward to purchase those. We continued to work, and the more profitable we were able to make the corporation, the more shares we were able to purchase. And as we purchase more, our buying power becomes more, and we rolled our profits that we earned from our shares we owned into that. And that's actually how we were able to purchase. So at no point did I go to a bank and say I need to get a loan to purchase a pharmacy. At no point did I surrender half my paycheck to do that. I did it while earning a staff pharmacist wage and taking the earnings from that. The sellers of the pharmacy were very happy with it, because when you build a group that is 5 or 6 pharmacies big, it becomes a difficult thing to sell, something that as I get older, I'm all too aware of. I've got this thing that is going to be, you can't sell it to a new grad. It's 6 pharmacies big. So finding a group like that is something that required some sacrifice from both of us. Was not the quickest process, but it did get us there. Their model before was always equal partnership. However many partners they had, nobody was ahead of anybody else. And we saw it serve them well, and we adopted that for us. So there are 5 partners. We each own 20% of the company and make decisions, based on that. When we have an important decision, we vote and we go from there, working together. What we've seen over the years is that each of the stores has at one point lost money, and oftentimes lost enough money that it would be enough to put you under if that was all your eggs were in that basket. If I owned this pharmacy, I probably would have gone under already. But the other pharmacies had a good enough year that they were able to offset that. And that has been able to keep the ship afloat for all this time now. That's 50 years that this ownership model has existed out here. And at no point have they all lost money. And I'm not sure at any point have they all made money. That is unfortunately the nature of it. But it has worked out well. And I think you have to have partners that you trust, and it's important to have a good group. And I feel incredibly fortunate in that group. It gives me a huge leg up on anybody when I'm having a dilemma, whether it's like an ethical dilemma of how should I handle this, or a question of have you ever seen this before? I've got that network to rely on at all times, who are as invested as I am. And that investment from them also I think it's helped to keep my level of effort and engagement high, because I know there's times when I've been burned out and I'm like, maybe I should cut my hours, maybe I should do this. And no, I've got an obligation to my partners, who are also feeling an obligation to me, to make sure we're all pushing forward and not, taking those shortcuts to say, heck with this, I don't want to do this. That's more work than I think it's worth.
Mm. Yeah, I think this is fascinating because, I at least, when I think of independent pharmacies, I think of independent pharmacy, right? Like you have a single owner, single pharmacist, and your experience shows that, right, that's not how it has to be. there are these opportunities for accountability and support, right? That can maybe help, yeah, weather some of these downturns and, as you say, keep you focused on the highest quality of care. So, I mean, do you know of other examples of this type of ownership model among independent pharmacies? What's maybe standing in the way of this being an opportunity that people take advantage of?
In all my years of going to NCPA conferences or whatever, I've never heard anybody who's done this exact thing. I've seen some 50-50 partnerships, that kind of thing, which is certainly similar. Those are often family, but not always. And when I describe this situation to people, I will, inevitably, if I describe it to a few people, I'll hear somebody tell about a time they had a partner that went horribly sideways. One person really took the others for a ride and that. So, in some ways I feel fortunate that we've never had that. Everybody's been engaged and been, all paddling in the same direction. So we've never had to deal with that. But, I also know for a fact that I would have gone out of business at one point, if not multiple points over the years, if I was doing this on my own. And it also, not to understate what may be an obvious thing, but when you've got 6 pharmacies, it allows us to have scale beyond what a single pharmacy operation would have. We can purchase at a better rate on many things. We can utilize that and leverage it to make the whole corporation more profitable, more valuable, and share expenses. We don't have 6 people doing HR for us. We've got one HR department. We don't have 6 accountants filing our taxes. We've got one accountant filing our taxes.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just, for any students listening, it's something to keep in mind, right?
Yeah, I think it's so well known. It's almost a cliche that a group of students or group of anybody gets together at a bar and they decide, hey, we should all buy a bar together. Pharmacy students, I think the difference is, hey, we should buy a pharmacy together. And this is a different model. I think you put multiple pharmacists into one pharmacy and it gets really hard to cover that overhead right away. Most pharmacies, independent pharmacies, don't necessarily do enough volume, especially a new one, to cover 2 pharmacist salaries. It just isn't the way it works. But this model of getting a trusted friend, somebody who you've got the same goals and vision for what you want to see happen together to take over a couple pharmacies is actually a much, much more sustainable way to go about it. You're both working, you're both focused on your pharmacy you're managing, but you're committed to the success of both of them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, fascinating. I want to move to some other potential opportunities here while we're getting toward the end and then leave some time for audience questions. But you mentioned the House Bill 1222 earlier. So another aspect of that bill, which again was, I think, signed into law in May of this year, is it established that rural independent pharmacies will no longer need a pharmacist on site at all times, subject, of course, to some safety considerations, I believe. But how is that provision impacting your work experience, or how do you expect it to, going forward?
I think, I don't want to understate it, but I think it's maybe the biggest change that's happened in my career for quality of life of a pharmacist. I mentioned I grew up son of a pharmacist in a small town. His relief pharmacist that would come work for him came from, sometimes 100, the Colorado Springs area, which was like a 3-hour, 2.5-hour drive. So he didn't come for just anything. It was when we were going on vacation, he'd come and stay in town for a few days. My relief pharmacist who comes from Colorado Springs. So that's an 1.5-hour drive. That works when she's working all day, but it does not work for the 4 o'clock. I want to leave early because something's going on. I've just missed those things. This year, since that bill was passed, I was able to coach my son's soccer team. I duck out of here at the pharmacy at 5 and go over and coach them. And for the last hour of the day we were open, we call it going remote. We're essentially a telepharmacy for all intents and purposes. My technicians are still there, able to fill prescriptions. And one of my partners at a sister store is able to review anything that needs to be picked up that day. So they remotely verify everything, which is what that bill gives us the ability to do. And I was able to coach my son's soccer team, and I had a blast. And I think the kids enjoyed it. It helped me be a better member of my community, of taking on a volunteer role that I otherwise would have had to say, sorry, I can't do it. And then, now we've started basketball season, and just last week on Thursday, I went and watched a junior high basketball game that I would absolutely have not gotten to go to before. So being in a small town, one of the toughest things of being a pharmacist has been how much I'm tied to this business and how much I'm tied to this location, and the things that I know I have to miss out on. And this has really opened that up, and just absolutely huge for quality of life and letting me feel fulfilled as a parent and a member of the community.
Yeah, I mean, people move to you mentioned the retirees, right? Like, people move to these communities maybe because they're looking to be part of a community, and they lived in a big city, and maybe they felt disconnected from aspects of community life. And it sounds like you're now really able to realize that sort of rural ideal, right?
It's one of the things that's hard to explain if you've never lived in a small town, but being a small town pharmacist is a weird kind of celebrity. I have no doubt I am one of the most recognizable people in town. I am well known by a lot of people, and I know a ton of people. Pharmacists tend to know a lot of people. We see a bunch of people every day, and we learn their names. So I am very well known, and it's a very fun part to be that integrated into a community. I lived in Denver for the years I was in pharmacy school, and night and day different. And in some ways, it's nice to go about in complete anonymity when I'm up around that many people. I kind of enjoy that part as a little vacation away from being so recognized. But it's also fun to be so integrated into a community.
Yeah, and so building off of that, I wonder if maybe we could finish on this sort of question. So, like, what best distinguishes your day-to-day work as a pharmacist in a rural community? It may be that it's those very personal interactions and relationships you have, but I'm sure there's other things you could say.
It's my day-to-day, I think it's very similar in some ways to any other pharmacist. I'm checking prescriptions and verifying this is the right drug, and all those kind of things that we do. The relationships are a little bit, I think, more connected. I've got people where not only do I treat the grandparent, the parent, and the kid, all of them, but I know that too, and they know that I know their grandparents, and those kind of things come up in conversation. And I'm sitting in our room where we do vaccines right now, and I have had multiple times where I've had people shed tears over the COVID pandemic, where they told me about how they lost a first in-home relative to COVID, and maybe they'd been pretty against the vaccine, but now they're gonna go ahead and do it after their brother or their wife or somebody passed. I've had tears shed in here multiple times with patients that you form those bonds with. And it's a tough thing, but it's the most rewarding thing.
Yeah, and you mentioned vaccines as a service you can provide. Are there other ways in which you're supporting patients or community members beyond dispensing medications that you think are unique to the rural setting?
We tend to wear a lot of hats. I serve on our school board, and that throws me into a bunch of times whenever the school needs somebody for talk about a career day or to judge a business model or something. I'm one of the first people they call for that. So there's plenty of those kind of things, health fairs, Vaccines is a big one. Pre-COVID, we did some, but not very many. And now, I've done 10,000 plus vaccines, which is kind of nuts to think of in a town with 3,800 people. But it's a whole lot of vaccines done over the years. And we do some test to treat stuff. That's relatively new to us, building that out. Med review on discharge and things, and not unusual to have a patient come in who they got their whole bag and they're so confused, and okay, let's sit down and go over these and figure out what we're doing, what we're not doing, when you should be doing it. And that's a big service, because so many, especially of our elderly, are just completely lost in the healthcare system.
Well, let's turn to some audience questions. I hope I've left enough time. It seems like we have a good number. So here's one from a pharmacy student. So she writes, I'm a pharmacy student and will be doing some rural rotations in the future. What tips, advice do you have for incoming interns in the rural, rotation, I assume?
Yeah, I did one of my rural rotations out in Lyman, Colorado at a Hoffman drug there. And I just dive in. It's going to be a little bit different than probably what you're used to. And rely on your techs, because your techs are going to know everybody and everything. Yeah, I think don't hesitate to take the advantage to go do some of the things that make rural life different. If there's a big game going on that people are talking about, I mean, really, what are you doing on your nights when you're in a rural rotation anyway? Go check out that game. Go try and get a feel for what the life is out there when you're there. There's a whole lot of people who choose rural locations for that lifestyle. And if you're going to be there, give yourself a chance to see if it's for you. It's a beat of a different drum, but it suits a lot of people really well.
So then there's another question from a librarian, and they write, you mentioned that your pharmacy offers telehealth services. Many public libraries are also stepping up to support their communities by providing access to telehealth at their locations. For example, the Lamar Public Library serves as a designated telehealth access point. So do you see libraries as a viable partner to support the work you do as a pharmacist in the community?
I wasn't aware they were doing that at Lamar. That's really an interesting thing. Lamar's one of the towns we have a pharmacy in. Out in rural Colorado, I think pretty much everywhere, certainly in our area, access to mental health services is virtually none. There are no psychologists out here at all. So virtually all of that is happening via telehealth now. And having good spaces for it tends to fall into these other clinics that maybe have a space for it, and the libraries are, I think, underutilized almost always in these small towns. So I love to see that. That's great.
And going back to one of your comments earlier, I can imagine that serving as one of these central medication drop-off points. Like you mentioned somewhere they were doing that. I forget the town name, but.
Oh, like the take back stuff? We do that here.
Okay.
Yeah. We've got a med take back box, and we process that.
Well, I meant where, instead of bringing a place where people come to pick up their meds, as opposed to the delivery service having to take it all out to, the 40 miles away place or something.
Yeah, we put ours in a grocery store at the time, because it kind of fits that. But a library is a good thought for an option for that. Yeah.
Here's another interesting thought. This question says, greater than 50% of the Ouray County population is over 50 years old and not lower income. If our special district had a building that would pay the overhead, could we attract a pharmacist? So thinking through some innovative means of making it affordable for someone to move into one of these rural settings or more rural settings.
Yeah, I think especially when you get into the mountain and resort communities, and been to Uray. It's beautiful. I love Uray. That's one of the big things is your overhead cost for your rent is going to be so high that it would really, I think, discourage a lot of entrepreneur pharmacists to go there. If you can provide a building where they can do that, that is going to make it a lot more appealing. I think that's one of the toughest things is covering those overhead costs. A population of 1,000 is tough, but it is a very isolated community. So you would have a good loyal patient base there. So I definitely think that could be a viable option for a pharmacy.
Along those lines, I'm gonna ask my own question here.
Mm-hmm.
Apologies to the audience, but something you and I have talked about before is non-pharmacy industry, right? Like there can be a business in a rural area that's hoping to grow, right? Recruit, attract employees, right? And something that may be, an incentive to doing so is there being good access to healthcare in that community. And so if there isn't a pharmacy in that community, you could imagine one of these industries, right? Like having a reason to invest in such a business. Do you see opportunities for pharmacists in rural areas to work with these industries to partner on, in a similar way to kind of reduce the overhead costs of establishing an operating pharmacy?
There's a lot that you can do with that kind of thing. One, you're absolutely right. When this is a thing across small towns, having a pharmacy is a tentpole operation that helps support other businesses. It helps to keep the clinics, and you've got a nurse practitioner who's running their own clinic. It's tough for them when there isn't a pharmacy in town because people are used to having to go somewhere else for healthcare. They may just do their doctoring in the next town over as well. So it helps to build all those things out. But for you've got an employer that has a good number of employees, you could do delivery to that place that helps to be an incentive to them of, this is one thing that makes your life easier. For the employer, you could do a program where some 80+%, 85% of drugs in this country are generic and pretty cheap. It's the 15% that drive so much of the business. As a business owner who has employees, I ran a program for mine where we provide the cheap generics to the patients, to our employees / patients at no charge, and incredibly popular, and saved us money because we don't have to submit them through our PBM and pay a fee on each prescription or to our insurance and all that. So it was win-win for us, and could be for an employer. They might be paying $20 for each of those prescriptions. I'd be willing to fill it for $15, and they don't even have to submit it. Patients get it for free. Everybody's happier.
Mm-hmm. I'm just reviewing the questions, like what do we have time for here in the last 3 minutes? Well, here's a question about professional relationships in a rural setting. Also, I'm not sure if you can see the question and answers. Maybe you could tell me if there's one you'd rather answer. But this question is, how would you describe the professional relationships between pharmacists and prescribers? I think referring to, physicians in your area.
During the opioid pandemic, I think it was a real advantage because all the prescribers, their habits, they know you, especially when you've been here a while. And it got to where if I saw something out of the ordinary, I'd know it right away. So people were less likely to pull stuff in small towns because we knew who the prescribers were and what their habits were. But you get to know them, and it can be a really rewarding relationship back and forth. Over time, you build up a reputation with them, and that call that, so many times I call a doctor's office and it's like, well, put in a message and we'll get back to you. You get to know that provider, and it's like, you know that I don't ask you to interrupt them and get them out right away because this is really urgent. I need you to do that. And they will. Or they know, I tell them, hey, this one's not urgent, have them get back. We've got that rapport of those kind of things. And some of it, the test to treat's been an interesting one. Worried about stepping on their toes. At one point, we were worried about stepping on their toes with vaccines. But for the most part, small town providers are so completely overwhelmed. We do not have enough providers. They are happy to let us take anything off their plate that makes their lives easier. They are tired of being there until 8 o'clock at night because kids have their strep throat going around and they've got too many people to test than they have time for. And if they can send some of those to me, they are more than happy to.
Well, thank you very much. We're at about time. We really appreciate you joining us and sharing all of your experiences. We appreciate the attendees as well for joining us today for this hour. Please be on the lookout for a survey that will come in an email if you were RSVP'd. Please do take that and continue to just look back at our bioethics website for upcoming sessions in the spring. Thank you.
Say I'm pretty easy guy to get a hold of. You guys know pharmacy in Rocky Ford. We mentioned it about 50 times. You Google that, you'll find my number. You can ask for Kai. If you have any questions that we didn't get to, or you're interested in independent pharmacy, if you're a pharmacy student who's thinking that direction, believe me when I say I'm never happier than to take a call to talk about that kind of thing. So reach out. You can find me. I'm easy to get a hold of.
Excellent. Thank you. Yeah, thanks for taking the last word there, Kai. All right. Also, this will be recorded and the video will be available for anyone who'd like to view it in the future.